The fight does not end because the hunger strike ends. The fight continues. We have immobilized a nation. We have immobilized our tribe.
The fish soup diet is over. Theresa Spence has given up her hunger protest, not a hunger strike. You know that. It's not a hunger strike. She gave up her fish soup diet, moved out of the TP, moved out of the hotel, actually got checked into the hospital last night or early this morning. David Akin joins us with some interesting details on this. David, you were by the TP on Victoria Island late yesterday, weren't you?
I was, and just to, see, this is, when I say late yesterday, we're talking like, nighttime, 10 o'clock or so. And there was a significant group still sort of hanging around. The fire was going. But one of the things I think not a lot of people understand is the chief and the other people who are doing, Elder Ray Robinson and others who were participating in this protest, they weren't staying there all the time. They had a room at a nearby hotel, and they would often spend the nights, and why shouldn't they? I mean, it is minus 26. Last night it's been
it's
pretty
horrible.
darn chilly.
But there was the perception out there that she was sleeping and staying at the TP.
I think there was, and I asked Elder Robinson today in Ottawa. There was a press conference in Ottawa. We thought Chief Spence was going to be there, but she was in hospital. Ray Robinson, the elder, asked him about it. He said yes. When it got really cold out, he went to sleep in a hotel.
Okay, which I'm not going to blame them about, but people should know that.
Right.
Now, she is out of the hospital now, Theresa Spence.
Right.
Interesting detail there.
Right. So she checked in the hospital last night, and word during the day, IV drip or getting used to solid foods, apparently got used to solid foods very quickly, because by mid-afternoon she was released from the hospital and she showed up at the hotel that a lot of the natives have been using here in town, the Delta Hotel, for an honor Theresa Spence ceremony. She showed up at 3:30. That's Ottawa time. Notably, that was also the same precise time that Assembly of First Nations National Chief Sean Atleo began his press conference in Vancouver. And it's hard not to notice the bit of the power play going on here. You know as well as I do, when there's election campaigns, all the leaders coordinate so that the leader of Party X is not speaking over the leader of Party Y, and everybody understands that leaders ought to have their own time. So presumably Sean Atleo yesterday saw Chief Spence's 11 o'clock time was on the schedule. She changed that at the last minute and scheduled his for 3:30 Eastern time, albeit out in Vancouver. Nonetheless, there's Chief Spence, a bit hogging the spotlight at the same time that the national chief, Sean Atleo, was speaking about things.
Which goes to what I and others...
It's all about Theresa.
Well, not just that it's all about Theresa, but that there is a power struggle and a political fight going on, including one to push out Atleo. And you tipped me off to, I'll give kudos to Toronto Star, something I don't always do, but Tim Harper picking up on things that we've talked about here. The split in the Assembly of First Nations and so on. He had that great column last week. I want to get to today's news conference and then to the three-part series that you're a part of. Sun Media Papers have a three-part series on the I Don't Know More movement and what's going on with First Nations across the country. And you've got a great column coming up, but let's play a Bob Ray clip from earlier today at the news conference.
These things don't seem realistic. Do you really support them?
I do, and I think your questions reveal, frankly, a certain lack of understanding of the nature of the Canadian Constitution. Do you think that the government of Quebec would have been able to develop a hydro in northern Quebec without the prior approval and without a treaty? Why do you think they negotiated? Why do you think it took a year to get it done? It got it done because...
Bob Ray there, David, in the entire answer, and it was a very long answer. It was one of the longest news conferences I've ever seen at the National Press Theatre. But Bob Ray said that he agreed with all of the claims within this new set of demands that Chief Spence and her supporters have put out. He also said he agreed that this is sovereign nation to sovereign nation talks that need to go on. So now we have 630 sovereign nations inside Canada?
Well, this will be great news to the Parti Québécois and the Bloc Québécois, of course, who've been demanding this sort of activity for a long time. But it does seem sort of remarkable that Bob Ray would commit his party, which he will not be the leader of very shortly, to this sort of extraordinary arrangement. I can't see Prime Ministers Chrétien, Prime Ministers Martin even, and we know Martin was very down with the Cologne Accord and all sorts of things, submitting every piece of legislation in this consultative way. I mean, the goal is noble, and Thomas Mulcair, the official opposition leader, notably not at that press conference, and I think that says something as well, keeping his powder a little bit dry, issuing something along those lines, saying, I sort of support the ideal but not necessarily these details as they're presented. But Bob Ray, his response there was asking about whether the Governor General needed to be president, saying, oh, of course. And Romeo Saganash was sitting next to him. He's the MP, the NDP MP, Cree leader from Quebec, noting how he'd been active for 30 years negotiating land claims, was active on that Cree Quebec deal. The Governor General didn't sit on those discussions 30 years ago.
No, not at all. So there is this three-part series, begins tomorrow. You've got a column. And your column tackles what is supposed to be one of the central issues for the I Don't Know More people and the people around Chief Spence, and that is Bill C-45, the budget bill, gives bands the ability to deal with their land more effectively. But you look at bands that have been successful dealing with their land.
What we want to do is there's 600 and some odd First Nations in the country, and they are not all Attawapiskat. I mean, and sometimes I think if you watch the protests, you would think that they're all poor and all starving, etc. There are lots, we're going to get to in a second, but there's a whole bunch that have signed some new agreements with the government to take control of their own affairs, and they're doing great. But 1 in 4 reserves in this country are in what is called default management. I can break the numbers down here. There's 154, look at that bottom line there, that are basically need training wheels to manage their own affairs. There's 3 levels of default management, and I'll work from the top down. 77, that's most of them, are things aren't really bad yet. The bands are still allowed to run their own affairs, but they got to file a whole lot of paperwork to Aboriginal Affairs. They're under close eye.
Okay.
The second part, co-managed. That's Attawapiskat is in co-management right now, where the band is still running things, but the federal government says you're going to have someone run shotgun. We're going to appoint an expert to make sure everything's okay. And then there's a smaller group, 14 of them, where things have gone so off the rails, the band and council are no longer running their own affairs, and the federal government has stepped in to do so. Notably, we've heard a lot of talk about the Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs and how militant they are. 54 of that 154, default management, are in Manitoba. That province has by far the most number of First Nations in a whole lot of unable to run their own affairs.
Now, people keep emailing me about bands in the Kelowna area, and you look at that as well.
I look at the West Bank First Nation right across the river. It's on the West Bank, across the river from Kelowna. And there's a band that 40 years ago, their band office was a trailer. They had all the money to employ a secretary, and that's it. They got about 6,000 acres. Over time, they signed a deal. They got their own houses in order. Transparency, governance, fiscal framework. They sorted out their own affairs and did it so well. They went to the Fed and said, we are now prepared to take on managing our own lands. And the Fed said, great. And it's a bit of a complicated thing, but they signed this framework management. Now, these guys are producing $300–400 million a year in GDP just from the reserve, sending back taxes to the feds and the provinces of about $130 million a year. This is that band from the economic development they've been able to do on their own reserve. It's not a casino. It's spas, resorts, wineries, all sorts of activities. They're building residences for non-natives to live on. They're landlords for people in Kelowna. It's a real success story. That's Chief Louie and his band in West Bank. That is where everyone would like bands to get to. But as I say, we've got 1 in 4 that don't have the ability to govern their own affairs. It's so bad we can't sign these deals with them yet.
All right, David Akin, make sure everyone, David's got a great column, highly recommend it. I've read it. Might be online later tonight, but it's in tomorrow's papers as well, so pick up a copy of your local Sun paper or go on Sun Plus online. Grab that. Lauren Gunter taking part in this series as well, running tomorrow through Sunday. Stick around, more to come.
Boop.